This episode is sponsored by the Bridge to Recovery, a nonprofit program on 115 acres near Bowling Green, Kentucky, a tranquil place where they've been changing lives for over 40 years. Their people improve their quality of life by acknowledging past emotional wounds and healing from all forms of trauma. The CEO, Paul Hamlin, has been a friend of mine for 20 years. Call him directly at 858-945-7848. That's 858-945-7848, or you can learn more about the Bridge to Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting thebridgetorecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. This episode is a little bit of a departure from what I normally do. On the 5th of September, I was interviewed for a live radio show called Moments of Clarity. It's hosted by a licensed mental health counselor on the west coast of Florida named Tiffany Werner. Tiffany was the guest in the last episode, number 22. And on that show, Moments of Clarity, Tiffany focuses on breaking the stigma associated with mental health, behavioral health, mental health treatment, behavioral health and addiction treatment. So covers topics that kind of fall into those categories. And if you've listened to the podcast, I've been pretty open about being a person in long-term recovery myself. So Tiffany had me on her show to talk about that, to talk about my recovery, to talk about my work as a substance abuse counselor. And during the interview, she says that I've been a substance abuse counselor for 20 years. I've been an addiction counselor since 2009. I've worked in the addiction treatment industry since 1998. So I've been doing this for over 20 years, but specifically have been certified in the state of Florida as a counselor since 2009, and a little more recently, over the last couple of years, I got an international counseling certification. So anyway, Tiffany was kind enough to let me use the sound from that broadcast and share it with you here. September's National Recovery Month. So for me, being in long-term recovery means not having had a drink since September 7th of 1996. So this interview took place just a couple days before that anniversary. And I thought it would be a good way to share part of my life story with all of you. So I hope you enjoy it.
Just the product of some bad seeds. Just some guys that grew into weeds.
Welcome to Moments of Clarity with Tiffany Werner, licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. Moments of Clarity's mission is to educate and end the stigma on mental health through the inspirational stories of our exceptional guests. You can join in the show by calling Tiffany toll-free at 866-826-1340 or on Facebook and Twitter at MOC with Tiffany. Now, here's Tiffany Werner.
Hi, and thanks for listening. This is Moments of Clarity. I'm Tiffany Werner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. Today we're going to be talking about something that is worldwide. It affects everyone. And it's one of the hardest things to fight. It's killing people every day. And a lot of people don't know how to get out of it. And what I'm talking about is substance abuse, addiction, and hopefully at the end, recovery. And my guest today, he hosts and produces a podcast called The Path to Authenticity. And he's been a substance abuse counselor for over 20 years, working with people and families that are affected by addiction. And he helps young men and women navigate the terrain between early stages of substance and abstinence and long-term recovery. And I want to welcome to Moments of Clarity, Tom Gentry. Hey, Tom.
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
So, yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, so great. Let's start in the beginning, where you found your passion for recovery and how you ended up where you are.
Wow. Well, I'm like a lot of people who end up working in this world of substance abuse treatment and recovery. I got sober at 23. I'm the youngest of 8, come from a big family, and I had an older sister who kind of led the way for me and got sober. And a year after that, she just kind of wasn't going to have it any other way than to see her little brother survive. So she kind of she did everything she possibly could to help me, and I was really grateful to have a family member who was in recovery at the time. She passed a few years ago, but, she was kind of my angel.
When was the time that you felt like you hit rock bottom and that you needed help?
Well, I have never felt anything worse than not being able to stop drinking. That was probably, once you get to a point where you really don't want to be doing it anymore, but you can't stop yourself, that's pretty frightening. And I would say that was my rock bottom. I remember, I started drinking pretty young. I don't even really know how young I was when I started to drink. But by the time I was in high school, I was drinking consistently. And usually getting drunk every time I did. And by the time I was out of high school, it was almost every night. And I remember being afraid to turn 21 because I knew once I really had unfettered access to alcohol, all bets were off. So,
it's scary to know that when you have actually freedom to do something, it's worse.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it. Most young people, they probably really look forward to turning 21 and being able to go out and explore and all that stuff. But by the time I got there, I knew it was going to be bad news.
What do you think is the projected you to want to start drinking so young?
Well, I grew up in a family where there was a lot of drinking, especially the men in my world. That's kind of what they did for fun. A lot of them still what they kind of do to have fun. So, I had this desire, like all little boys do, to be connected to the grown men in their life and I wanted to feel closer to those people who I loved. And for me, kind of the unspoken message that I got is the way I was going to achieve that was by drinking.
So it was more of a social thing that you were just used to, or you wanted to be accepted, kind of peer pressure?
I wouldn't say it was peer pressure. I think it was more about belonging. I wanted to feel like I belonged among them. And, when I was a little boy, it was kind of, go play, go. And every little boy wants to be a man. He wants to feel a part of with the men in his life. And that's what they did. And, it was fun. They had fun. There was a lot of laughing. They all played cards. I mean, it just looked like the life to me. It's what I really wanted to do. I just really wanted to be a part of it. So I wouldn't say it's as much pressure as just wanting to belong, wanting to feel like I belonged more than I did. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you were set up for failure from the start with a bunch of role models that kind of let loose, and that's what you saw.
Well, I think that's definitely one way to look at it, and that's a valid point. And over the years in my recovery, I'd say that's one of the reasons I've come to forgive myself for some of the mistakes that I've made, because it kind of was a setup. It would have been miraculous for anything to happen besides me becoming an alcoholic. It would have just been, nearly impossible for that to not happen, I think, in hindsight. I didn't, like you hear in recovery, nobody ever aspires to be an alcoholic or a drug addict. That's not what I wanted. I just wanted to have a normal life. So, it wasn't like, I just decided, well, I'm going to make a lot of bad decisions. It's something that happened to me. Not that I didn't have a role in it, not that I wasn't responsible, or I'm not responsible for my past or anything like that, but I certainly didn't choose it.
Well, Tom, can you speak into your mic a little bit?
Sure. I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little bit better. Yeah. A lot better, actually.
Okay.
So, when did you decide to start listening to your family, like with your sister? What happened?
Well, what happened? What happened is that I, back when I was a young adult, I was working as a carpenter, and I had this job where I was traveling, installing hardwood floors. We had this big job in Chicago and ran out of material. So I had a couple weeks, where I was at home, not working, waiting on materials to arrive at this job from Canada. And I pretty much stayed drunk the entire time. And at the time I still lived with my parents. I just kind of was hiding in my bedroom, only coming out when no one is around to go get more alcohol or go to the bathroom or whatever. And, sooner or later they started to try to intervene. And, it was a pretty dramatic last day of my drinking, which was actually will be 23 years ago tomorrow.
23 years in recovery.
Yeah. So, a sister, I have 5 sisters. One of them who still lived there kept trying to kind of get me to come to and, get moving. And, I just kept kind of playing possum, pretending like, I was passed out or whatever. I know this sounds crazy, and it was.
Nothing sounds crazy on this
show. But I kept pretending not to come to, and several times that day she called an ambulance for me, and these paramedics would show up in my bedroom and say, "Are you okay? Do you want to go to the hospital?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm fine. No, I don't want to go." So, they wouldn't take me without my consent. And finally, and I learned all this probably a year later. I mean, I was blacked out, but I vaguely remember them coming one of the times. But eventually I conceded and went to the hospital. And, one of the stories that I like to tell about this is that, going back into childhood, elementary school, I was a pretty good student. And where I grew up in Indiana, there was kind of a track for gifted students where they kind of had advanced classes. And I was in some of those, and I remember in 3rd or 4th grade, the teacher going around the room one day and asking us all what we wanted to be when we grew up. And vividly, I remember this little girl, Angie Lee, raising her hand and saying, "I'm going to be a doctor." And so I end up getting taken to this emergency room at 23 years old. And lo and behold, there's Angie Lee doing her residency and looking down at me saying, Tom, what are you doing with your life? And, you know, that was like one of those moments. That was a turning point for me. I knew something bigger was happening in that moment. She definitely was an angel who appeared in front of me. And, you know, it was really, it was just what I needed at the time. She gave me a lot of love and attention, and just kind of comforted me. And, but I refused to stay in that hospital. So, you know, the medical staff there told my parents, you know, don't take him home. At that point, I had blown a 3.9 about an hour and a half after my last drink, which is not really far from legally dead.
It's really high.
It is really, really high. I've only heard of 1 or 2 people ever getting a higher blood alcohol content than that. But anyway, I wouldn't stay. So I remember it was back, you know, it was 96. Not everybody had cell phones back then. So I remember going into the parking lot of this hospital and getting in the back seat of my mom and dad's car, and they got in and my dad started the car and just kind of looked at my mom, and he got out and he went back inside the hospital and he called the police, and they pulled up next to my dad's car and told me to get out, and they handcuffed me and they arrested me for public intoxication. And by that time, I had already spoken to someone at a facility down here in West Palm Beach, who I am still friends with, a guy named Alan Schwartz, who took that phone call and was very, very kind to me, and tolerant of the way I treated him over the phone. I wasn't, you know, if anyone's ever worked in admissions at a substance abuse treatment facility, you know that that takes a lot of patience and tolerance, because often people
I've
can
worked
get
in
pretty,
a substance abuse facility too.
Yeah, people can get pretty abusive over the phone, and I did with Alan, but he listened, and he ended up getting me there. So I spent the night in jail, which kind of isn't my thing, you know. I'm not the only times I've ever been arrested were for public intoxication. I'm, you know, jail. Nobody likes jail, but I definitely don't feel like I'm someone who belongs in that kind of setting. But the next morning, you know, they just, my family, they just wanted me to get some help. And, you know, the night before, while they had me at this hospital, my sister lived down here in Florida, and she had gone to this facility in West Palm Beach and was trying to help me get in there. And so that night at the hospital, I kept saying, you know, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I need to leave. I want to go to Florida. And by the time the morning rolled around and I got my phone call from the jail cell, I called my dad at about 7:00 in the morning and said, listen, I don't care where I go, but I need help. And, you know, that's when I really let go. And, so that was, you know, maybe 7 a.m. By noon, I was out of jail. By 2:30 in the afternoon, I was on a flight. And I've been here in Florida living and working and in recovery ever since. You know, and I'll tell you, one of the things one of my sisters said
You're
to me.
paying it forward.
Yes. But something that I think is really important for people to understand about substance abuse treatment. I think one of the things that we see in the media is we see a lot of examples of people not, quote unquote, succeeding. Before, you know, one of my sisters drove my mom and I to the airport. My mom flew down here with me to make sure I'd make it, which happens all the time. But the last thing she said to me was, you go there and do what the people say and get better. Mm-hmm. And I've always carried that with me, and I did it. You know, the things that they suggested that I do, I did it. And that's why I've been sober ever since. And, you know, there's a lot of skepticism about rehab or substance abuse treatment. And the reality is, you know, if a person goes to a good place and gets decent treatment, if they just do what is suggested to them, there's a pretty high probability they're going to remain abstinent. You're going to get better. There really is hope. And I'm living proof of that.
Somebody's out of denial.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is hard. It's, nobody ever wants to go through this stuff. And that's something I try to really acknowledge and validate with the clients that I work with, that, this kind of sucks. Nobody ever wants to go through this stuff. But, if you can come out of denial and embrace what's happening to you, and then you can begin to see the opportunity of the good that can come from it, and which, thank God, I've been able to do,
Absolutely. Sometimes we all need a wake-up call in some form or another. And sometimes it is the power of suggestion that people will change once they're aware.
Yeah. Well, another gift that I got through that whole scenario, one of the benefits of having a sister who was in recovery, she'd been doing it for about a year and living it, and was with people in recovery. And the picture that she painted for me was, it can be pretty great, Tom. You can be a lot happier than you are. You think it's going to be terrible, and it's really, really not. And so it opened my mind a little bit. And then one of the best things that happened to me when I got to the treatment facility where I went is I began to see these men who had been sober for a long time who were really cool. They were happy. They were funny. There were people who I could identify with and see myself associating with. And that was really important for me to see that. They were people who I could relate to, who were living sober, and they were happy.
But it sounds like you didn't have that before.
I really didn't. I didn't. I had one aunt and uncle come to mind who, they were kind of the branch of our family tree where they didn't really drink that much. And all the rest of us kind of looked at them like they were a little on the square side. And, they weren't any fun. But I'll tell you what, guess which aunt was writing me letters when I was in treatment? It was that one.
The square side one.
Guess who came to visit me in Florida when I was in very early recovery? They're the ones who showed up for me. They knew something the rest of us didn't. That's the truth.
What do you think they knew?
Well, drinking all the time isn't really as cool as we think it is when we're doing it. It's really kind of sad, because what I know now is I was avoiding my life. I wasn't living my life. Mm-hmm. I was trying to escape from the distress in my life. I wasn't living. I was just barely surviving. They knew that.
Yeah. And some people want to enjoy life, right? And not escape. And it's much better when we actually appreciate what we have, and rather than avoid it. I want to welcome callers to call in 866-826-1340, 866-826-1340. If you have any stories or feedback that you want to contribute or join the discussion, 866-826-1340.
Yeah, just to jump on what...
I appreciate your transparency, Tom, and what you're saying, because a lot of times things spiral out of control and people don't know exactly where it's coming from.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you went into the program, what did they work with you, and what do you think that kind of treatment modality is appropriate?
Well, it was a Hazelden facility, which is, Hazelden is kind of the granddaddy of all treatment facilities. Mm-hmm. It's a multidisciplinary approach. They definitely make a conscious effort to treat the whole person and every aspect of the person. It is a 12-step philosophy that they are definitely grounded in, which, helped me a lot. The 12 steps saved my life. I try not to be, I'm not a person who's so narrow-minded as to think that the 12 steps is the only thing that works. There are other ways, but I believe, those in my world of addiction treatment are familiar with a guy named Father Joseph Martin, who did a lot of writing and a lot of work around early recovery. And one of the things Father Martin said is AA is what works best for most people. And I believe that's the truth. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is probably what works best for most people. It certainly is not going to hurt someone to go through the 12 steps. It's a set of spiritual principles that begins most importantly with honesty, not only with other people, but especially with yourself. So, I don't know that I really experienced happiness in life until I went through the 12 steps. It was, I grew up in a relatively religious household. I always knew about the 10 Commandments and all that, which, they're great. But what I loved about the steps and the principles behind the steps, they weren't about don't do this. They were about this is what you do. This is how you live rather than how you shouldn't live. And that, constructive sort of input was really helpful to me. It was a framework within which to live, which I really didn't have before. I remember taking philosophy classes in college and reading all these books and thinking, how does this really come to life? Like, I don't, I believe all this stuff, but I don't really know how to do it. Well, the 12 steps for me was an answer for that. It was a way to live. And it still is for me a way to live. It's a set of principles that I do my best to adhere to, which basically boil down to being good to yourself and being good to other people and living the kind of life that you can be proud of. For me, it's about living the kind of life that I can be proud of so I don't feel the need to change the way I feel anymore. I don't feel the need to escape anything anymore. I can enjoy life without indulging in that way.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.
Hey, welcome back. This is Moments of Clarity. I'm Tiffany Warner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. And today we're talking about substance abuse, recovery, addiction, and ways to cope with addiction, and for everyone suffering in silence, and for people that are suffering with family members, watching them suffer. It's really good to talk about this and to be aware. And we're welcoming callers to call in 866-826-1340 and join our discussion. And welcome back to my guest, Tom Gentry.
Thank you.
So with the 12 steps, we're talking about recovery and how it's not easy helping people in recovery. And it's a lot of turnover. It's a lot of, I think when I was working in the substance abuse facility, they kept calling them frequent flyers in a sad way, but it's like kind of a revolving door for some people. But what I witnessed is that eventually they got it right. And it's never a failure if a relapse happens. Just keep trying.
Well, and I was talking to someone, another therapist yesterday, who is really interested in this aspect of things because, as professionals in the substance abuse treatment industry, we tell people it's a chronic illness. I believe it's a chronic illness, but the nomenclature that we use, like relapse, we talk about it, we treat it as if it's an acute illness, when in reality, a chronic illness is something that has to be continuously treated. And and I think what's problematic about that is the idea of relapse is one that has a lot of shame attached to it. it's definitely, speaking of stigma, I mean, the idea of a relapse is definitely stigmatized. Not to say that it's good or anything like that, but it can often be a reality, and not everyone is able to get it the first time around. It's just not the way it is. I mean, I didn't. I went through one treatment experience before all of this happened. That's what part of what I left out in the story, is that I had already gone to an intensive outpatient program and only made it about 60 days. But I needed that experience and that quote unquote failure, if you want to call it that. I needed to go through that to be able to know what I needed to do differently the next time. And I feel extraordinarily grateful because I have been able to maintain abstinence all this time. And I think if truth be told, I really believe that some people just have it harder than others. And, I thank God that I've been able to do this and for it to stick. But I think we got to get away from talking about it, treating it as if it's an acute illness, because it is something that has to be treated continuously. And thank God, again, one of the things I recognized very early on was, the people who really do well with this are the ones who embrace the idea that this is an ongoing process. So for me, it was about, no matter what, whether it's the 12 steps or if I choose to engage in some sort of religious activity, personal growth, individual therapy, whatever it is, I have to keep growing. I have to keep changing and keep getting better in order for this to keep working. And I also have to share it. I also have to give what I've gotten to other people. For me.
And so you used what you've learned in your experience in order to help others?
Yeah. And, it's not even always about substance abuse or addiction or mental health. We just went through, I'm in West Palm Beach. We just went through this experience with Hurricane Dorian. I made myself available to people who needed help. And so I don't think it has to be as narrow as just addiction. I mean, I think it's about being a good human being and helping other people and being kind and just being nice, I think goes a long way.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And is there something wrong with our phone? People are trying to call in 866-826-1340. But yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Tom. And seriously, we have to learn from our mistakes, and sometimes we have to fall a couple times in order to get back up the right way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I had someone in my office the other day that was saying that they were in one of the AA meetings, and that someone was 23 years clean and had thought he was going to have a good time and drink. And he was there to pick up his 3-month check because apparently that wasn't okay for him. He can't just pick it up and then be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that happens to a lot of people, and a lot of people are scared to start over, but it's still part of the recovery.
Yeah.
And if you start at day zero, it's not starting over. It's picking ourselves back up and brushing ourselves off.
Right.
What would you tell someone that was in that path?
Someone who had been sober for a long period of time and then relapsed.
Mm-hmm. And was feeling
I'd say, thank God you made it back. And it's okay. It's going to be okay. I'd validate that. I mean, when I think about how I would feel if I drank at this point in my life, it would hurt. And, I wouldn't want to go through that. So what comes up for me in that situation is compassion. I'm here with you. I'll sit with you in this and let me know what I can do to help. You're not alone. the reality is when you see people who've been sober a long time try to make it back, it's pretty hard. And I think a lot of it is, it's about that shame. People feel, not only have I let other people down, I've let myself down. It's a major commitment. Sobriety is a major commitment. And one of the little lessons I learned as I was trying to get sober before it began to stick is that, I really was trying to stop drinking every single day. I mean, I'd wake up every morning feeling terrible saying, I'm not going to do this again. And then it's like I would go to work that day, and at the end of the day, I'd get in my car and my heart would just drop into my stomach, and I'd do it all over again. But every day it was a commitment I made to myself and then didn't keep. I was letting myself down. So the shame was just snowballing. I felt terrible about myself. And so, yeah, that I think, when you are able to maintain abstinence over time and have some success with this, I mean, I guess the higher we go, the harder the fall, right? I mean, and
True.
it's hard for people to come back.
I'd rather fall hard than not fall at all. But what would you say about with somebody that had a family member that was in concern? How would we help somebody that was in trouble without making the problem worse? I think a lot of people are, at least what I've seen and in my world too, it's hard to tell somebody that we think they have a problem, that they need help, and in a place of love. And a lot of people don't take it so kindly either. So what would you say some advice to do?
Well, honestly, get some help yourself. It's a family disease. Don't try to do it alone. Go to Al-Anon, get yourself a therapist, get some help with this. Kind of the nature of the illness is that when someone is in an act of addiction and they're confronted, what comes out is anger and denial, and on a unconscious level, it's the disease saying, leave me alone, get away from me. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I see someone here on Facebook mentions intervention is a lost art, which I completely disagree with. I think it's something that a lot of people try to do and don't do very well, but there are really some brilliant interventionists out there. And I mean, just call somebody, call me, call Tiffany, ask for help if you're a family member. I think one of the things I was taught very early on is as family members, it's extraordinarily difficult for us to help someone in our family. We don't have objectivity. We're emotionally invested. We can't see what's really going on. So we need help. We need another set of eyes.
And sometimes coming from personal family members, it's offensive to some people, but they're not willing to hear it from family.
Well, and usually it's, look at you, look at what you're doing. I mean, it's shifting blame and that whole routine. And again, that's not something a person can do with a professional.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't get paid to take bullying either.
Yeah.
when I'm the therapist.
Yeah.
No. Right. And so I think everyone probably knows somebody that overindulges in some sort of form, and to kindly be able to tell them that they're concerned. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I think, and I think this is true with just about anything in life, is if you are really intentional about coming from a place of love, that's a good start. I'm here for you no matter what. I'm here to help you. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here no matter what. But, as family members, it hurts to see this, and it's hard for us to keep objectivity. And we're so invested that it's just really, really hard.
So what are some things that some people that are desperately needing help and maybe listening to this show and looking for help but afraid? What would you advise them to do?
Get help, find a 12-step meeting. If that's all you can do, go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting. Call someone like Tiffany or me, call someone and ask for help, because one of the things I've definitely learned is that when someone wants help and they're willing to get help, there's definitely a window of opportunity that expires. So when you're ready, you got to seize the moment. And family members, when you have someone who does want help, don't let that opportunity pass. Help them get the help when they're asking for it, because you don't know if and when they'll ever ask for it again.
Mm-hmm. And that moment is probably crucial for someone's overall wellness and potential to get better, is how somebody responds if they come out and ask for help and say, maybe I have a problem, and how they react. It's crucial. Nobody wants to be attacked. Nobody wants to be judged. Nobody wants to feel ashamed ever when they admit they have a problem.
Well, and I think one of the things that complicates matters with this, it is really difficult to do that, to ask for help, especially from a family member. Say, in this day and age, most of the people ending up in substance abuse treatment are young adults. So going to your parent and saying, I have a problem, it's not unusual for a parent to say, are you sure? Really? Because, as parents, we don't want to believe that our child is an alcoholic or a drug addict. There's shame for us too, as parents. I mean, it is pretty complicated and difficult terrain, but, if I'm a guy who needs help and I ask for help and that's not validated or met constructively, then that definitely takes the wind out of my sails, and it's going to be harder for me the next time to ask for help if I'm willing to do it at all.
That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. I
think our internet's down, Ed, and I think the 800 number is down. So for the listeners that you guys are trying to call in, it's the local number is 727-441-3000. 727-441-3000.
Yeah, you told me there were going to be a bunch of callers. I was expecting to not be talking this much. Yeah.
It's kind of distracting. But anyway, so yeah, let's actually take our second break, and we're going to pause here, and we'll be back with Moments of Clarity in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Hey, folks, you can find The Path to Authenticity on Patreon, patreon.com. Patrons are entitled to supplemental content like early access to episodes as well as unedited interviews. There are other benefits you can find in the various tiers. Any contribution is greatly appreciated. Visit patreon.com/The Path to Authenticity.
Here's Tiffany.
Hi, and welcome back. And if you're just tuning in, this is Moments of Clarity. And my name is Tiffany Warner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. And I'm sorry for everyone that's trying to call in. I don't know what's wrong with the 800 number. We're trying to figure that out. But anyway, we're talking about substance abuse, addiction, recovery, and the 12-step program. And welcome back my guest, who's the producer and host of The Path to Authenticity, Tom Gentry.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the show today. Let's talk about your podcast, The Path to Authenticity. And what is The Path to Authenticity, and how do we get there?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what it's all about. There's a comment that someone made. I'm looking at the Facebook page, and a comment someone made, the beginning of it is, substance abuse and addiction are among the forms of sedation that prevent us from looking at the root of the lies we tell ourselves each day. And that kind of relates. That kind of relates to what why the path to authenticity for me. What I've come to realize is that I was denying myself. And I've talked a little bit about like the culture of my family and how I entered into alcoholism, but there was, I've done a lot of work on myself, and there was a lot more going on. There were reasons for me to try to sedate myself and not feel what I wanted to feel. And a lot of it had to do with me not being true to myself, not being the person who I wanted to be, and instead being the person who I thought would fit or in the family, or who would not be abandoned or whatnot. I adapted to survive the environment I grew up in. And then I turn out being someone who's like really not who I am, not true to myself. And what I've come to realize is that the more true to myself that I am, the more successful that I am. And, I kind of, the name for the podcast kind of came up a few months ago because I was in this interaction with someone who was just being, from an emotional standpoint, just completely fake. And I realized, this is just not what I'm about. I'm about experiencing my emotions and dealing with the reality, and becoming more authentic has been a real turning point for me. So I decided I wanted to do a podcast for a while. And what I decided to do is have the kind of underlying theme be personal authenticity. Talk to people who, at least from my point of view, are authentic, are true to themselves, they're genuine people. And how did you become that way? And for me, I like to focus on artists and writers, because creative people, it tends to be a little more obvious how they decided to dance to the beat of their own drummer, and I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. So I interview people. So I kind of look at it like people who I want to talk to, people either who are authentic or people who can help the rest of us become increasingly authentic. So I speak to therapists and coaches, and, I have an episode coming up with someone who is, an emotional acceptance coach, which, is a whole little, branch of the tree of the helping profession that's kind of coming up now. She's in the UK. I just did a podcast with a guy who has a podcast about, the history of the band. I'm a big music guy. So just the idea that someone will come up with a creative, he's really being himself in doing that, that's coming from a deeply personal place when someone chooses to do a project like that. So, it's pretty broad, the subject matter that I try to cover, but I always try to kind of bring it back to how does this relate to personal authenticity, and how can we learn from what this person is saying and doing?
That's awesome. And I encourage you guys to listen to Tom's podcast. I actually was a guest on it yesterday, and he hosts a good podcast, and he does really well and interviews interesting people. And it's the path to authenticity. And how do people find your podcast? Really quick, we have about a minute left.
Well, there's the website is thepathtooauthenticity.com. It has links to all the different platforms where you can listen, and also to the website where the podcast is actually hosted. You can find it on Instagram and Facebook, both at The Path to Authenticity.
At The Path to Authenticity. That's amazing. And keep up the good work, Tom. I'm honored to know you, be able to call you a friend. And
likewise. And
we'll be in touch and continue to network. I encourage you guys to follow him at The Path to Authenticity. His name's Tom Gentry. And you're listening to Moments of Clarity. We'll be back tomorrow, 12 to 1, every Thursday, Friday, 12 to 1. Thanks for listening, and be kind to yourself and to someone else. You don't know what everybody's going through.
All right, there you go. Moments of Clarity with Tiffany. So I just want to say you can email the show at thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com if there's anybody out there who heard this and needs some support or direction as it relates to someone you love with an addiction, substance use disorder. You can reach out to me. thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com. If I can't help you myself, I could probably help you find someone who can. So if you enjoyed the show, please take the time to leave a review or a rating or both at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever platform it is you use to listen to podcasts. Would be a really big help. If you're not already a subscriber, if you could be so kind as to subscribe. The more reviews, the more subscribers, the more ratings, especially with Apple Podcasts, the more noticed the show will be. And, I'm just kind of trying to get this thing off the ground. And right now, and what I intend to do is to always offer it for free. So I want to keep doing that. But at some point, I'm going to try to get some advertisers for the show. And that means I need to be able to show that people are actually listening to this thing. So again, any support you can offer, I'd really, really appreciate it. You can also find the show on Patreon. It's patreon.com/thepathtooauthenticity. There's some benefits to becoming a patron of the show, some supplemental content, early releases of episodes, that sort of thing. Any support is appreciated. You can also support the show by liking us on Facebook or following us on Instagram. Both of those are at The Path to Authenticity. So again, thanks for listening. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be nice.
You did great, honey.